So in the previous session, we have focused on synchronous teaching. We've looked at the platforms on which we can have video conferencing, some new features which we can use. And of course, there is a lot of other material and tutorials which are available on the workshop website, as well as on YouTube, like there are infinite such tutorials available. But we've covered some basic features. And then we've also talked about how to use various tools in live classes, and also some sort of VR or virtual reality 3D immersive engagement if you would like to have with the students and the students with each other, more importantly, such platforms like Verbella or Frame VR. In this session, in the second session, we will be talking about asynchronous teaching and particularly self-paced teaching. So one second, there's a question. Once breakout rooms are created on the calendar, students will be in the groups right from the start of the meeting? No. So first, everybody will join the main class, Dr. Day. And then when you will open the breakout rooms, there'll be an option to edit and open rooms, which you have to activate. When the breakout rooms are open, then by default, they will see an option that they have been asked to join breakout room 14, for example, and then they can join it. It will not be by default. So here what we see is, in terms of asynchronous learning, so we understand that what is the meaning of self-paced learning? So we want to talk about two specific styles, one specific style of asynchronous learning, which is called self-paced learning and also flipped classroom. Okay, so what is self-paced learning? Self-paced learning is when the learner, it's a learner-centered model where the central focus is on the learner. So it is the learner, the student, who actually decides when they want to learn and what they want to learn. Unlike the traditional lecture model where the teacher is the focus, right? It is teacher centric. The teacher decides what they will teach in the classroom. And in that way, the class kind of becomes like a monologue, and it's more of an information sharing session rather than a discussion session. In 21st century, however, there is absolutely no dearth of information today, right? So like if this was 20 years ago, people would need to come to the classroom to actually gain new information, to gain new knowledge. But today, all that knowledge, all that information is already available online. So the role of the instructor actually has evolved from being that of one who shares new knowledge now to being more of a guide and a coach. So that is where comes into picture flipped classroom. This is another learner-centered teaching model. Here, the study material is shared with the students in advance before the class. Students can take sufficient time to absorb that material at their own pace. And then the actual class, the live session that you will hold, that would be focused on interaction, discussions, queries, tutorials, problem solving, or hands-on exercises. So we can say that self-paced basically means you learn at your own pace. The learner has that flexibility. You can call flipped classroom as a semi-self-paced version. It is not entirely self-paced because, of course, students do have to keep up with the class schedule. So if I have a class on Friday, the student should complete the assigned study material before Friday, before coming to the class. So you can call it a semi-self-paced platform, but it gives students the flexibility as to when and how they want to learn, of course, within specific deadlines or before the designated class. Okay. So MOOCs around the world today follow this self-paced model, and it is one of the most popular online learning model around the world. Why do we actually need self-paced learning of a flipped classroom, specifically in say, our context of engineering, management, or humanities, especially in the wake of this pandemic? Why do we need this? So especially given an institute like IIT, where we have students from across the country. They are right now scattered across the country, some of them in rural locations, some of them are socio-economically disadvantaged, may not always have excellent connectivity. They may have limited internet connectivity. Even if then they have connectivity, it may be low bandwidth or poor speed. There are frequent power outages across the country, which again disrupts live classes. And add to that natural disaster or this pandemic, and it's a recipe for disaster, right? And in such a case, if we want to give the students flexibility, this model can offer that several advantages. Like it can give students the convenience about when they want to study. Even if for some reason they miss the live session, it's okay, because anyway the live session is going to be recorded. However, the student has the ability, they have the convenience, they have the flexibility. Oftentimes, because there is low pressure as to, like, gather everything or grasp everything in one session, keeping concentration, many a times it can also help in increasing the overall efficiency of learning, because it's learner centered again, right? And it gives the students some autonomy as to when they want to study, in which flow they want to study. So to execute a flipped classroom, what do you need? You need to create material, the material that you would share with the students before the class. Then you need to assign, you need a mode to assign that study material. How you do that, that is also up to you. Now, the best way to lose a learner is to just make a PDF and share it with the students, and then we will have absolutely no way of knowing whether they actually went through that PDF or not, right? So it will be better to interleave some questions in between. So by giving this study material, in a way, we are trying to replicate a classroom behavior. So what would happen in a live classroom? Suppose you were teaching a topic for the first time in a live classroom. How would that go about? You would present the topic, you would talk about certain concepts, you will pause in the middle of the class, right after a topic, and you will shoot a question back to the class to understand whether they're really understanding or not, how engaged they are they listening, are they involved? You would shoot, it's going to be a very simple question, it's not going to be a complicated question, but a simple question arising just from what you just discussed in class, right? So in such a way, we can always interleave questions in the middle of that study material, so that when the student is accessing it in offline mode, in asynchronous mode, in a self-paced mode, they know where to stop, they know what to focus on. If they are not able to answer that question, they should have the flexibility to review the previous portion and then come back and answer this question, right? So it's a form of knowledge check. How you can assign this or create this, we will talk in just a moment. So since we're talking about a flipped classroom, we said flipped classroom means giving material offline and allowing students to absorb it offline and come to class and have discussions, interactions, and problem solving, right? So first step is creating material that you'll share. Second is a platform of assigning the material. Third is a platform for monitoring the engagement. Like I said, if it's a PDF without any interleaved questions, we can just leave it to the trust and think that people are going to review that material before coming, but they won't. 90%, 80% rather, students will not review the material before coming to the class. So we need a mechanism to monitor that engagement as well. So if it's a video, we need some data on how much time they spent in the video. Did they watch the video at all? How much did they get in the, like, how many questions did they get right? It's okay if they get the questions wrong, right? That's perfectly fine. In a live classroom, if you asked a question and a student gave a wrong answer, it's perfectly fine. It doesn't matter. There's no need to penalize them. But it gives an idea as to how well are they understanding. Is there a problem with our delivery of content? Or were they not listening? And then if they revisited the material, were they able to answer then the second go? So there is no penalty here, but just some sort of analytics on what kind of engagement is there. So we can monitor that engagement. How? We'll discuss in just a while. And then what is the last element of a flipped classroom? Once all this material has been shared, students have gone through it, then they come to your live class, which is as per the timetable, and you use that session for interaction, discussion, tutorials, and problem solving, or maybe some hands-on session exercises, Q&A, query, doubt session, right? Or a revision session, anything, that's up to you. So this, even in the SOP for online classes, we have a very well-defined element called interaction. Like your classes, according to the SOP, which was shared last year, in an online class, there can be a lecture component, but there should also be a well-defined interaction component. So how do you, so the first part we will discuss later, like creating material, we'll come to this later, right? How live sessions should happen, that we've already discussed. Speaking of how you can assign material and how you can monitor that material, whether how well the student is absorbing it. This is where come into picture learning management systems and other platforms that enable learning management systems or can be integrated with learning management systems, right? So the one we are using currently, which is a part of our G Suite Education Enterprise, is Google Classroom. There are many, many other learning management systems like Moodle, Canvas, Top Hat, Blackboard. Today in the afternoon session, Suman would be talking about the Moodle platform and how you can create such a, you can assign and monitor such assignments on Moodle. He'll be talking about that in the afternoon session. In this session, I'm going to quickly run you through some features as to how you can make the best out of Google Classroom. So if you, again, last 1 year has been spent on Google Classroom already. So most of us are already familiar with it. If you are a first time user of Google Classroom, or you're going to teach using Google Classroom for the first time, again, I would suggest you can go through the video, which is available on the workshop webpage, where introduction to Google Classroom is described in details. Since we've covered it in the last workshop, I'm not discussing it in detail, but some ways I can talk about how you can make the most out of Google Classroom, or you can make the best out of Google Classroom. So one such option is to manage the stream. So on Google Classroom, if you notice, many a times, so this is a test class which I have created for this purpose. And you will notice that every time you post a new assignment, it appears here on the stream. So the stream is your main, like if you compare it to Facebook, this is like the wall, your main wall, right? Your main timeline, and everything you post comes over here. Now, many a times, if you want to use Google Classroom stream as a discussion forum, posting material and notifications of material here kind of distract the student. It becomes very congested. So one way to solve this would be that if you use stream entirely dedicatedly only for discussions, and you do not take notifications of things that you post otherwise, assignments or study material, that doesn't show up here. That would help make this stream a more streamlined discussion forum, right? So what you can do is you can go to settings, and here when you see option of classwork on stream, you select hide notifications. Also, you may want to select the option of students can only comment. So you make a post about a certain topic and you can say, post your queries, have a discussion on this thread, right? And you start the discussion and students can post comments. Usually, like I personally don't like the idea of student posting something new, some new post on Google Classroom, but if that's okay with you, please, you can change this option to students can post and comment. But usually it is more convenient to have like having their questions and interactions on chat. So they can actually answer each other's questions in that through comments instead of having to post. So this is the class setting that you can take to do that, to manage the stream and convert the stream exclusively for discussions. A few more things about assignments. So note that what I'm showing you right now is on the assumption that you already know about Google Classroom. If you are new to Google Classroom, the introductory video is available on our website. After this session, you can please review that. Right? So the next thing is about assignments. If you haven't already used rubrics, rubrics is another very useful feature. Rubrics are essentially telling the students what criteria you would be using to evaluate their assignment. So what should they focus on while submitting an assignment? So you can actually define this criteria against any assignment. You see an option of rubric, create rubric, and here you can write the criteria and also what would be the level or what would be the points assigned to each criteria. So say suppose I'm taking one criteria as correctness. So I'm taking an example where I have a 5-mark question and I'm going to assign 3 points to correctness and 2 points to showing the detailed steps. So thinking of an engineering question, right? So I'm saying correctness is one criteria. I'm going to give 3 points if it is fully correct. And I'm going to give no points if the final answer is incorrect out of this 3. But I'm also going to add another criteria called steps so that there is partial marking. There's provision to give partial marks. So I'm going to say I will give 2 points if all steps are described properly and maybe something went wrong in the last step and answer became wrong. I'm going to give 1 mark if partially steps are explained. And I'm going to give 0 marks if there are no steps. Only the answer was there and that answer is also wrong, the student gets a 0 mark. So you can save this rubric. You can also reuse these rubrics actually. And you see the marks are already automatically updated. It said it has taken it to 5, right? And this rubric will be visible to the students. This helps them understand what they should focus on while writing an assignment. And this would particularly be useful in say humanities or management classes, right? Where students need to understand that grammar is also important, vocabulary is also important, construction of the sentence is important, copy editing is important. So if those rubrics are defined, students will know what to focus on and what to ignore. The second feature is comment bank. We have covered this briefly in the last workshop as well. So we know that when we are evaluating any assignment and we've gone to one student work, you see that there is this option of question bank here. Right? And there are some comments which you frequently use. You can add this to the bank, right? And you can add a new comment as well. So when you are using this in an actual assignment, you select the area to highlight. Now you don't have to type it again. If you simply write the hash symbol, all the comments which are there in your comment bank will appear here. So it saves time in that sense. You don't have to go to the bank and add those comments individually. You can simply use the hash button, right? If there are, this will be useful if there are same kind of comments that you use, like say, I'm not going to accept this, or say this was an exam, right? And resubmission was not allowed, but they have resubmitted. So it's disqualified. Attachment is missing. It's fine. Or, redo this area, redo this step by using another algorithm. Why don't you try something like that? So if those kind of comments are added to the bank already, using the hash symbol would be helpful. Another useful extension is called the moat extension. So again, this was in details described in the previous workshop. The video is there on the website. But what this essentially does is, you usually give comments in the form of text, right? You will write down a comment. But suppose you have a very large class of 400 students, and you are exhausted to the point that you can no longer write comments as feedback. So if you and the students both install this moat extension, you can give audio comments. You can add audio comments to your assignment, right? So very quickly, you can just turn on the mic, say a line like a voice message, and that will go as a comment to your assignment. So if you can try this out and see how this works. The last thing in case of assignments or getting notifications is about email notifications, right? So many of you must have noticed that you get spammed, your inbox gets totally spammed by Google Classroom notifications at first. What you can do here is go to these main settings, and here you see some email notifications. So of course you would want to receive email notifications for some topics. Like you want to get a notification when somebody posts a comment or somebody specifically mentions you. So you can do that by adding a plus before their name, like how in email we would add @. If I write @ Preeti Tiwari, I would get Preeti's name, and it will she's going to get tagged in that email. Similarly, we can say plus in Google Classroom. So you would want to get a notification if somebody asked a question personally to you, or somebody made a private comment on your on the assignment. But you don't want to get notification every time a student submits late or resubmits their assignment, right? But you do want to get a notification if you are invited for a class. So you can select what you want to get a notification for from here and decide, right? You also have this option of selecting if there are multiple classes, for which of these classes you want to receive notification and which you don't. You can disable that. There's one question. Oh, okay. Suman is responding to Sucharita's question, Professor Day's question, sorry. Now, some other extensions which you can also find useful, and these are particularly useful for management or humanities courses. Like there's an extension called Share to Classroom. It gets connected, linked to your Google Classroom. So if there is any web page or article that you want to immediately assign to a class as an assignment, you can do that directly from that link from the browser. Push to Students is another extension where whatever is on your screen, you click on that extension and it automatically appears on the student's screen. Web Paint is another extension which you can use to write. If you want to use pen tools over a browser, you can use Web Paint. But like the first two, for you to use them, you and your students both have to install these extensions. Only then it will work. If only you install, it will not work. So there are some really useful Chrome extensions. Must have Google Chrome extensions. There's a YouTube video, very interesting, whose link I am going to share on chat now. Right, you can take it offline and watch this. Now, some special Classroom app features. So we know that Google Classroom has a web version, the desktop version, and it also has an app version for Android and Mac. So specifically some features which are there on the app but not on the desktop version. One is the random student selector, and the other is how you can use pen tools for grading assignments. So the random student selector is I didn't notice it for a very long time actually. So here you go to, if you open it on a tab, on your phone, you go to People, and on the People's page, one second. Yeah. So on the People's page, you see this funky little icon. You click on that. That is a random student selector. So this can be used to randomly pick students during a class and say you want to ask them question, you want to call them later, you want to mark somebody as absent. This can be done. So it is completely random. It randomly gives you a name of a student from your class. And the second one is using pen tools for grading assignments. So specifically, if I'm looking at engineering related courses, right, where most of the assignments will be some handwritten assignment, right? And oftentimes, if it's a small class, it's okay. You can always open that, like how I showed in the previous screen. You can open the assignment and you can, highlight a particular area, insert comments, insert marks, and all these things. However, if these are written assignments and there are too many in number, and you are used to grading papers on paper, right? You have this need to make a tick mark. You need to write marks for each question. It becomes sort of inconvenient to do that on a web platform. So if you have a tablet, I would strongly suggest you grade such assignments on the tablet. So this is a screen grab from my tablet where I'm going to student work, and I'm going to select one of these students. Submission. So I'm going to see the history, whether did he submit it late? No, it's within deadline, so it's fine. I can, no penalty. I opened this assignment. I click on edit, and here I select the pen tool. So I'm selecting the red one, and I can tick mark. I can write the marks. Right, this one is correct, but he has missed out on some labels. So I'm going to cut some marks there. I know the total now, 4.75. I click on save. So the moment I click on save, you notice that on Google Meet, there is a second file which has been created. This is the edited file. So this is the one which has my annotations on it. It has the name edited, right? Now I can enter the marks over here on top, 4.75. I will wait for its status to change into handed in but not returned. I haven't returned it yet, right? This is one, like, it's sort of a bug on Google Classroom where unless this status was there and if you returned it, that those scores actually don't get updated. So you just need to wait and just at your end, just check whether whatever scores you're giving, they're getting updated or not, right? So simply I've entered the marks, it is saved. And now all I need to do is click on return. And that's it. If I did not want to return the scores right away, all I could do is just simply go to this back window, and I will come back to this screen. right? So all the marks will be saved. And once I have graded all these papers, I'm going to select all here and then return all these grades at the same time together for everyone. Otherwise, you will start getting individual emails from students. I have got this much marks for the other student, how much marks have you given for this question if this was missing, right? So it is better you wait until all are graded and then you return them together after you have clarified to the students regarding your grading scheme. So Dr. Asapo is saying the YouTube link is not available. Okay, I will check that out. It was available, I think, till last year, but some of those features have been updated now. Many of those, because some of those extensions were related to Google Meet. And now that Google Meet has updated itself, some of those may be redundant. So I'm going to check another link and I'm going to share it with you all offline. I'll also update it in that in the workshop webpage. Right? So sorry about that. Dr. Arora is asking, what are the other components of asynchronous learning other than assignments? So assignment is just one form. In general, any study material, it can be a video lecture, which has questions interleaved. It can be a chapter excerpt. It can be a software sandbox, in the sense where students can actually tweak certain certain parameters and see for themselves how the result looks like without actually having to do back-end programming. So such software sandboxes can also be made using some e-learning authoring tools, which some very small example we plan to cover in this workshop. So there are multiple ways of assigning material to students in asynchronous mode. Assignments being just one of them. Video lectures, as per the feedback I've got from the students, they find learning from video lectures of the instructor much useful. And if we rate them in the order, I actually took a survey from first year students and the people who have just gone into second year now, regarding what helps them learn, right? Do video lectures help them learn? Do assignments help them learn? Do projects help them learn? Textbooks. And in all this, they all rated video lectures to be on top. Then they rated textbooks and assignments and projects. Actually, textbooks somehow surprisingly got a very low score because these students are not really used to studying from textbooks somehow. Now, the last feature of Google Classroom, this is not a feature of Google Classroom rather. So we know that on Google Classroom, you can return the scores of assignments which are already there. Like you posted an assignment, students submitted something against that assignment, and for that you can return a score, right? But if you wanted to return overall scores, say at the end of the semester, before the grades are declared, you want to share with them what is their total out of 100. Say in my case, for example, I had 4 components. I had a major exam, a lab exam, quizzes, and assignments. Now there were multiple quizzes, there were multiple assignments. How do I tell the students what is their final score? I don't want to share an Excel sheet with them because they will be able to see other people's marks. And there are 250 plus students. I cannot even share these individually through comments or private comments to the students, right? So one way to do this is to use a Python script, and your TAs can always find that out. We can help them out if you would like to use this. And what this essentially does is you create an Excel sheet with email ID as one column, roll number as another column, name as another column, and each of these other entries that you want to send, major marks, lab marks, quizzes marks, assignment, and total. These are all columns in your Excel sheet. And this Python script would essentially just create individual emails. And in the recipient, it is going to put that email ID and whatever is the body of the text that you can customize and write in the form of tags. So it's going to just read the data from an Excel sheet and send emails. You can send bulk emails like this to the students. This feature is something which is missing in Google Classroom currently, and that is why we use Python to return overall scores. All right, so that was about Google Classroom. If you, okay, so Dr. Asapo has some comment. You're relatively new to teaching, so I was wondering what would be an optimal number of flipped classroom sessions in a typical semester. So it is completely up to you. Depending on how comfortable you are, to do a flipped classroom, the instructor needs to spend a lot, I mean, a lot of time beforehand in creating that material and assigning to the students. So I would suggest, if this is a first time, if you don't have material created already, I would say you have fewer flipped classroom sessions and more live sessions. Once you've completed the course, or once you have actually created that offline study material for the students, then going for a flipped classroom session would be helpful, because it puts a lot of it needs a lot of effort from the student side, from the instructor's side, for creating that material, right? Because if you'll have to repeat the same thing in class as well, then it defeats the purpose. So that was about making the most out of Google Classroom. The next session, the next thing we will discuss is about how to assign interactive video lectures. And this is why video lectures, because based on the feedback from the students, they've all rated video lectures or self-paced learning through videos on the top in terms of what helps them learn. So one platform as to how you can create such interactive video lectures so that you can assign them to the students for self-paced learning or flipped classroom, one such platform is Edpuzzle, right? So again, I'll repeat what I said earlier. We're trying to replicate the experience that you would have in a live classroom, where you're teaching a topic, you take a pause, you shoot a question, the student, if they are paying attention, they will answer. If not, they will get the wrong answer, right? But in a physical classroom, this would be possible. You'll be able to do this only with a few students. But how can you ensure that the material that you are assigning to the students, the self-paced learning material, are they actually watching it? Are they really understanding it? How much effort are they putting in? So since the theme of this workshop is enhancing engagement, how you can monitor that engagement in offline mode for the students, one such platform to do this is Edpuzzle, right? So again, in details, we have covered Edpuzzle in the last workshop, step by step using Edpuzzle. All that is explained in that video. It's there on the workshop website. I'll give you a quick overview. As in, if you upload, what you can do here is you can upload any video. You can even use any YouTube video. You can import it onto Edpuzzle, and you can insert questions wherever you feel necessary. If these are your own videos, the students feel more connected, because this is just like being with you in a class, but on their own convenience. But even if this is some other material, you can add narration to some other material, or you have some slides on which you have added narration. You can just save it as a video file. Even on PowerPoint, you can save a PowerPoint in MP4 format, or sorry, Windows Media Player format. It becomes a video with your narration, and you can upload that here and insert questions. So you can see on the right hand side, it's showing how many questions I have inserted, right, for this video. How does the student see this? So while the student is watching, when the question comes up, the video is going to pause and the question is going to pop up on the right hand side. When the student answers the question, they get an instant feedback, and then they can continue. Or they also have the option to rewatch the previous portion of the video, right? So students are not allowed to skip questions. If you choose that option, you can always disable the option, but it would be pointless to disable that option, because that's what we want to see, right? Students answering question or seeing whether they are understanding or not. And they must answer each question if they want to continue. They can rewatch certain portions as many times as they want. They cannot fast forward the video. They also cannot change the playback speed. So this is actually one concern one of the students wrote in the feedback. And he said, he or she said, when I'm revising, I'm not able to change the feedback, the playback speed. So normally they would want to, when they're revising a content, they want to play it in 1.25x speed, but that is not available on this. So I answered that query, and I said, when you're revising, you don't really need to go to Edpuzzle. You can watch it directly on YouTube at 1.2 speed or whatever, 1.5 speed if you want. But on Edpuzzle, this playback speed change option is not there. Also, the correctness or the feedback is available instantly. Student cannot change the response after seeing that correct answer. They cannot go back and change it. And in fact, every answer can also be supplemented by the feedback from the instructor. Like, this is a wrong answer, why this is wrong? This is the correct answer, why this is the correct answer? You want to add some additional feedback from your side, additional notes or any important points? that you want to emphasize. So you want that, that also can be added. So you want that not just questions, but suppose the lecture was going on and you want to focus or emphasize on certain point, you add a note over there and say, note these things carefully. This is also helpful when suppose you're reusing certain material, right? And then the next time you are using this video, you feel like, no, these topics I have missed, or this kind of an application has just recently come to my notice, which I did not cover earlier. Those things can be added as notes, just to grab students' attention for emphasis, right? Also, the video cannot be played in the background, which a lot of us worry that if I assign a video, student is just going to play it in the background, do something else on another browser, and not pay attention. So it cannot be played in the background. It has to be the active browser tab. So of course, if they're doing something on their phone, then you don't have any control. But how you will get that control is through questions. If they're able to answer the questions, we can hope that, yeah, they have watched it. So one very quick demo of this. This is how the interface looks like. So you can see that, say, this particular video, 143 students had watched it. I can see how much they answered, how much score they got, right? Who submitted on time, who submitted it late. We can also see individual students. So these students are automatically imported from the Google Classroom. Edpuzzle is integrable. You can also see questions, how many got this question right, how many got the other question right. This also helps you understand what are the pain points in your class. Like, is the certain topic not understood by any of the students or a large majority of the students? You will get that kind of feedback by that data. You can also see individual progress. So suppose I click on a particular student's progress, you can see what grade he got, how much of the video did he watch, how many questions he got right, how much time did he spend on this video. You also notice that there is data on how many times a particular portion of the video, particular section of the video was watched, right? So what this seems like is that there was a question here which he got wrong, and he watched the preceding sections actually 3 times, but somehow he still got it wrong, right? So this is a feedback. If this is a pattern across a large class, then this is a feedback for the instructor. Maybe I have not explained the topic properly over here, or maybe there is a fundamental like a backlog in the students side, that there's maybe some fundamental which is not clear, because of which he's not able to answer. So this analytics can also help us understand how much effort students are putting in, how much time students are putting in. And like I said, Edpuzzle is also integrable with Google Classroom. So you have the option, you can integrate your Google Classroom with Edpuzzle. Students get automatically imported. They don't have to create separate accounts here. And you can simply export these grades to LMS, your Google Classroom. So whenever I post an assignment, it is posted on, they get a notification on Google Classroom only. The marks also will come on Google Classroom, but this is just an additional external interface for these interactive video lectures. Right? So I've been talking about this flipped classroom. So why this would be useful? I just want to share some feedback that students have given for this flipped classroom and how they have received it. So I asked this question to first year students who have now gone into second year, whether they find this useful. Out of 92 responses, you notice that almost like 85% feel that 80% they feel that it is very, very useful. 80 to 85%. There is a small percentage, there are 5% who feel that it's not useful. About 14% are like on the edge about it. I took another feedback from the next batch. There were 152 responses. There it was overwhelming. It said almost 90% feel it's good enough, and 10% they feel it's okay. Now, a lot of the this percentage, this 10 to 15% who are really not very excited about it, have the concern that it adds to their workload. So if you explain to the students that if you are looking at, say, 1 credit of course, it doesn't mean that it is just 1 contact hour, right? So 1 contact hour corresponding per week, corresponding to 1 credit, is not just 1 contact hour. There needs to be at least 2 more hours supplementing that 1 contact hour, right? With such flipped classroom or such assignments, you can actually also monitor out of that contact hours which you spend in class, how much time of those 2 hours the students is actually spending on this course. One reason is this, like they feel that the workload has added, has been more. And the second major concern, and that is about 5% of students, they actually like the idea of learning a new topic in class for the first time. They actually feel the need, they feel more connected if it is if it is in live session with everybody else present. It is just their learning preference. So there are about 5 to 10% students who would not really enjoy this, but by and large about 85 to 90% of the students do find this teaching model very, very useful, especially given this this pandemic and this remote teaching, right? Because we don't know what their local circumstances are, their connectivity is, their bandwidth is. And if you give them the option of studying at their own pace and then come to class and answer their queries, they find it really helpful and they appreciate it a lot. So at this point, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead. You can write it in chat or unmute yourself and speak. Yes, Professor Guma.
So from where to initiate this Google Classroom? It is when we log into the Google Meet, we can initiate this classroom?
No, sir. So you need to be logged in from your IITJ Google account, and you go to classroom.google.com.
Okay.
Right, and there it will show you an option of create classroom or join classroom. Pasted the link on chat. So classroom.google.com will show, because you're a faculty member, it will show you the option of create classroom or join classroom. If a student goes there, they will see an option of join classroom. So there you can create a class, it will generate a class code, and then that class code can be shared with your class. You can share it with Office of Academics and they will put it up in the final timetable. That class code can be put, or the second option is you will get a list of all the students which are enrolled in your course on Aryabhatta directly. You can download it and you can send you need to send only one email, an invitation link, and they can join. So the 2 options are there, class code or invitation link. And sir, for more details, I would suggest you can just quickly go through that video, Introduction to Google Classroom and various other features, creating quizzes, creating assignments.
Definitely, that will be helpful. So I'll go through that.
Yes, sir. It's there on the workshop webpage under useful resources. Yeah.
So this practice is new to me also, because I have not been taking too many classes this way. So I have not been doing in elaborate fashion what you have explained, examination. Different teachers have also not used.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Sure, sir. All right. So this next topic is sort of like not a preview, but you can say like a preface to the next session that we will have in the afternoon. And so we have covered the aspects of asynchronous teaching. We've basically covered LMS, right? We've covered the aspect of assigning the material and assessing or monitoring that self-paced learning material. We have much more on that as well in the second half. But in the second half of today's session, we will be talking about how to create content, right? Video content or using these e-learning authoring tools. And Dr. Suman Kundu will be talking about how you can create, like what I talked about, Edpuzzle directly from YouTube, integrating it with Google Classroom, how you can do that on Moodle. And he'll be talking about one such plugin. But before we talk about content creation, one should also know some basics of instructional design, right? So what exactly does an instructional designer do? Instructional designer is a very popular you can say profession, especially in today's e-learning era. And an instructional designer creates learning experiences and materials in a manner that results in acquisition and application of knowledge and skills. Right? So an instructional designer essentially needs to do the following. He or she needs to do a needs assessment, as in understand if there is a specific requirement, can that requirement be met with training? So they do a needs assessment based on what is the requirement of the learner. Then they would design the process. They would then develop the learning material, and they would then evaluate how effective that learning material was. And the skills that an instructional designer would need is one, understanding of learning models, how people actually learn. They need to have some experience in technology. They need to have good presentation and communication skills. They should be able to present material in an artistic, in a visual way, and they should be able to manage projects. So they should have those skills as well, management skills as well. So I know what you all must be thinking. You'll be like, this is what we all have been doing all this while, right? This is what instructors do. Now, in the world of instructional design, instructors are called subject matter experts, SMEs. So they assume that we are the people, the teachers are the people who know everything about the subject matter. But since we all have been working and we have been doing these tasks, we have been doing these, we need these skills to actually be a successful instructor. An instructor can very, very well be an instructional designer, right? And it is important that since instructors do this on a daily basis, if we understand some basics of instructional design, instructors will make excellent instructional designers. This is what I very briefly want to touch upon in this short session. And what are the basics of instructional design, right? So in the context of this session, since we are talking about self-paced learning material and we are in an online mode, so the material that I'm talking about is for e-learning. So instructional design, but for e-learning, right? We're not really talking about how to make lecture notes or other say software sandbox at this point. We're talking about e-learning material. So when you create a material, it should be short. There has to be interactivity in it. There has to be interaction. Like I said, the best way to lose a learner is to just give a PDF and think they will read on their own. They will not, right? So there's got to be interactivity. It should be digestible, and it should reinforce whatever is the core training material, like the textbook or the other material that you share with them. So it's good to have a very brief idea about various learning theories at this point. There is behaviorism, cognitivism, constructivism. So behaviorism is based on observable and measurable changes in behavior. And it assumes that the learner's behavior is shaped through either positive or negative reinforcement. So according to behaviorists, if you have learning objectives, and if the learning objectives indicate whether the learner has mastered a particular knowledge, their behavior has changed and learning has taken place. That's it. So this is on which the conventional classroom is based on. The next learning theory is cognitivism. And according to cognitivists, learning involves reorganization of experiences. So they consider it to be an active learning process, right? And as opposed to a behaviorist, a cognitivist would concentrate on making the learning more meaningful through learner's background. That means they will always assume that when we are teaching a new topic, this learner should be able to link it with some background knowledge they have, some background information they have, right? And make a connection. And the third theory is constructivism. This is primarily focused on experiential learning, self-directed learning, learning by doing something, right? So these are various learning theories which sort of inform how various teaching models come up with. Now, speaking of engagement, again, going back to engagement, since it is important that your material has some interactivity, it will be great to have videos, graphs, different types of interactivity, not just one type. You could have text, images, audios, videos present. You could cater to various stimuli that actually may have some sort of preference in the learning style of the learner. Now, one learner having one specific learning style is a myth. But there are many such stimuli like auditory, visual, kinesthetic, learning by listening or learning by watching, learning by actually having to perform the experiments or touch and then understand. So these are all auditory, visual, and kinesthetic senses. So we need to make sure that our material should have all these stimuli. It should not be just auditory or just visual or just kinesthetic, because various learners would have specific preferences or inclination towards these learning styles depending on the subject. Right? It may not be the same style which is preferred for all subjects. You can also use animations and infographics to focus or point out the attention in one particular detail in the order you're placing it. And then there is you can always offer positive reinforcement to the learner in the form of messages, in the form of points. You can also gamify the environment, as in provide some sort of bring in the elements of motivational psychology, provide some leaderboards, badges, so that the student feels a sense of achievement. Now, it's important to understand at this point that gamification is not just leaderboards and badges, right? Gamification is essentially, you can say, an amalgamation of motivational psychology using technology and game mechanics or elements of game design that cater to somebody's behavior being changed in a fun way, right? Using game mechanics. So you are catering to intrinsic motivation of a person, as opposed to, like, intrinsic motivation means they want to do this on their own. A person doesn't have to play a game, but they like to play a game, right? But if you like, for example, hiding a quiz behind the veil of a game is not really gamification. So I just shared a puzzle with you all, right, in the previous session. That is not gamification as such. I have just hidden the puzzle. I have hidden an actual quiz in the form of behind a game, essentially, right? That is not gamification. Gamification can be in two forms. It can be a gamified learning environment where you say you give positive reinforcements to desirable behaviors and you penalize behavior that are not good in the context of your class. You can give action points, experience points, leaderboards. You can cater to the intrinsic motivation. Then the second form is called game-based learning, where you actually teach a topic through a particular game, right? So that is what gamification means. But in the context of creating e-learning material, giving this kind of a positive reinforcement, which motivates the student or makes them feel good about themselves, that they would be motivated to go ahead and go to the next topic. Yeah, okay, now I want to explore the next thing. That is something what we mean by positive reinforcement. When we speak about graphics that you use in your material, it's important to keep in mind the contrast. Should be good contrast, should have good legibility, readability. Resolution of those graphics should also be good. Now, the image types that you can use, commonly used are JPEG, PNG, and GIF. JPEG is a compression standard. So if your file is, your raw file is very large in size, you can save it in JPEG form. It will do some compression, may hamper the quality a little bit, but then you have to decide based on the size of the image. PNG image type is when you can, using this PNG type, you can have a transparent background. That means if you have an image with a background, you can actually create a transparent background. So then you can place that graphic anywhere in your image with any background color, and it will appear transparent. Means only the foreground will be visible. The background is transparent. So when you want to do that, please use PNG images. And GIF is simply, you can say, a collection of certain frames or images which are running in loop, right? So it's not a video, it's still an image, but it is not one frame, it is multiple frames. So these are various image types which are common in e-learning material. Coming to fonts, the readability of fonts that you use is very important. Now, visual designers or UX designers work extensively in choosing the right fonts. Now, there are two broad categories of fonts: serif fonts and sans serif fonts. So serif basically means that if you have a long stroke, right, this tiny projection that you see, these are called serifs. These are serifs. Now, sans is French for without. So there are two broad categories of fonts. One that have a serif, like Times New Roman, right? Or Book Antiqua, which we use commonly in the institute. The other is sans serif. That means without these projections, without these small strokes, like Roboto, like Arial, like Calibri, right? So what commonly studies have shown, and what you can say visual designers usually suggest, is that if you are creating a material for reading on a screen, means an e-learning material, using a sans serif font would be much more readable. However, if you are creating a material to be read, like to be printed and read on paper, then perhaps a serif font would be better for readability. But in either way, sans serif fonts have better readability than serif fonts, right? So serif fonts means like Times New Roman, Book Antiqua, Garamond, and serif fonts. And sans serif fonts are those without these projections. So Arial, Calibri, Roboto, Sego UI, Helvetica, and so on. Also, it's important to maintain consistency. So if you're using certain font size of certain font type for headings, make sure you use that throughout the material, just for the sake of consistency. Right? And there are few principles of instructional designs. Multimedia principle, which says you should use both text and graphics while designing a learning experience. And because there are relevant graphics that would help learner understand and organize the material in a little better way. Then there is this contiguity principle that says that text should appear near the graphics on a screen. And when text and images are separated on a screen, then learners actually use cognitive resources to match them. And we don't want to add extraneous processing related to this instructional goal. So it's better to have text which is related to a graphic near that screen, near the graphic, sorry. Third is the modality principle. It refers to the fact that e-learning courses should have audio narration instead of on-screen text, especially because people have separate visual, you can say separate processing channels for visual or pictorial processing and auditory processing. So when they have to watch something and read it at the same time, the visual channels can get overloaded. So it is better if there's a list of steps, for example, it's better to present them visually and add an audio narration rather than present them in bullet points. The next principle is called redundancy principle. So the redundancy principle actually talks about avoiding redundancy on screen. So what this means is, for example, they say that an e-learning course should not have both on-screen text and audio added to a multimedia presentation. When there is a visual illustration on screen, and if there is text as well, then it is better to avoid that audio narration. On the other hand, if there is no visual illustration, then information should be presented both as text or audio. So having too much or having the same content in multiple modes could be avoided, like having those visual as well as the text, the same line what you are narrating, then having the narration as well. So the student can get confused as to, should I read, where should I look, should I look at the figure, should I read the text, or should I listen to the audio, right? So if there is a visual already, it's better to just have an audio than have the same narration as text. Then the coherence. Text or graphics which are not related to the topic should be completely avoided. They shouldn't be put there just for the sake of decoration. Otherwise, it's significantly distracting. And then the last principle is called personalization. So whenever you are creating a video lecture, it could be in a more, you can say, the construction of sentences that you use. If it's in first person or second person, it makes it more personable. It creates this feeling of social presence. So it is not like technical writing where things are in, say, passive voice. It's an active voice, and you are more or less focused on first and second person. And this is a conversational style, and which you can use using the scripting. This is supposed to increase their, or at least maintain their, level of retention. So if you have any questions or comments or anything you would like to discuss, please Let me know. Okay, so a sample video lecture that uses all these principles. I'll have to find it out, Dr. Pathak. Maybe I can share it later offline. I'll upload it on the website. I'll create it and upload it, right, with comparisons as well. So actually there are many courses on instructional design. So all this, what I just showed you, I learned it from an online course on instructional design. I would strongly recommend, if you have some time as an instructor, it would be helpful for all of us if we go through that once, right? And of course, I'll create such a sample lecture and share with you, Dr. Pathak. Okay, so we have some more time. If there are any other questions, please feel free to ask. We can have an open discussion.
So this has been very useful. Thank you so much. Since we come from another system and are not into too much, I've been teaching, but in a different way, and we've been using Microsoft Teams. So this is much more better. I look forward to bothering you with doubts and all.
Absolutely. We all are always here. Whenever you have any questions, you can just ping on Slack or drop a message on chat or anything. We are always here. And in fact, Google Classroom is sort of convenient, but we are now realizing that Google Classroom has some features, like at least from a point of view of question types, like kind of questions that you can ask regarding a material, that is very lacking in Google Classroom right now. And for that, you need more e-learning authoring tools, which of course you may not be using directly, like the instructor may not be using, but if you would like your TAs who work with you to know about those tools, you can definitely direct them in this direction so that they can help you in creating such material under your supervision, right? And we'll be talking about that in the second session today.
So how do you foresee in the coming times when this credit system is there and we're shifting to e-learning system, how do you kind of equate them?
So credits, right now, if we look at a 3-credit course, it means 3 contact hours per week. And in addition to that, there should be, corresponding to each of those contact hours, there should be at least 2 more hours spent by the student. So they may not be contact hours.
So supposing you're giving these flip lectures, so they should not be more than 3 hours of flip lectures or something?
Corresponding to 1 hour of that in-class session that you plan to hold, corresponding to that one session, the flipped session should not be more than, say, 1 hour. So I'm assuming that, say, the class is of, say, 50 minutes. So if the lecture content of about 50 minutes is already shared, that takes 1 hour. And the remaining 1 hour, I'm assuming the student would be solving other assignments related to the topic or studying in some other way. And then, say, 1 hour of class. That is how I would categorize it at this point. But we don't have any such guidelines as such for flipped classroom right now.
Okay.
But ideally, it would be good to have lesser content or maybe equal content spread across interaction as well as offline. But offline, since contact hour is 1 hour and corresponding offline hours are 2 hours, you can always use those 2 hours and say, I'm going to give you a flipped material for equivalent to 2 hours. But that will be a little too much. It will be a stretch.
Mm. And would it be possible for, supposing there are students who want to get into education line and engineering students, like I was mentioning to Professor Chaudhary about them taking the design credits, like learning how to make materials and all like this. So, so would there be options of working with your department to develop those kinds of things?
In an earlier discussion, I had asked Professor Chaudhary about content creation as such, but at the time it was not clear whether simply content creation can be considered for design credit unless there is a technology, unless there is some development aspect, right? If there is a design and development aspect to the project, it can be considered as a design project. But for design credits, but particularly content creation.
No, not content as such, that just making a PDF or making a presentation, no, but making it in an engaging manner using these tools like you were mentioning. Would that qualify? Because at the end of the day, they learn and they learn to communicate. I would see it like that.
Yes.
So that's why I was thinking whether that can be made into a very engaging way also, so that they also is like rewarded, feel a little rewarded in the sense that when they are learning by teaching, they learn more.
Right.
So that's why I was just thinking, meaning we have these design credits for students, and there could be so many options. So I was thinking in the space of tomorrow's education, and if some of the students want to get into these kinds of technology developments, because these would be very, very important in times to come. Like you mentioned, that information is all around. The synthesis of information is what these kids need to learn now, because otherwise they are very, very bombarded with too much information and don't know how to tie up things and become very superfluous. So that's why I was just thinking. I'm just thinking aloud because this is the first time I'm exposed to such a kind of AR, VR kind of a system and all. So just
I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And but we need a little more clarity from, say, Office of Academics, or Dr. Shah could probably shed some light, or we can have more discussions on how to design or define such design credits, right? For what kind of contribution would qualify as a design credit.
or some elective courses for the students where there can be an assignment. I'm just thinking aloud. There
Yes,
might
yes.
be already something, I don't know. So
Right. So, as a part of, I'm not sure if Dr. Anand Palapalli is here in the call. So, the Center for Emerging Technologies for Sustainable Development, CETSD, right? There is an education technology vertical under that. We were thinking about starting some courses there, like at least some, say, 1 credit course on educational multimedia, for instance, right? Which student can credit and make assignments in this form, or learn how to do this.
this would be very important.
Yeah.
This would be really important.
Yes, we're looking into that. We're trying to figure out how to do that. All right. So if there are no further questions, we will break for lunch, and we will start the third session on content creation at 2 o'clock on the same link. Meanwhile, if you have any other questions, this meeting will be still on. You can always post it on chat or in Q&A. Thank you. I'll see you at 2 o'clock. Thank you all.